Just giving you a heads up, it's very likely we're going to get hacked because of the subject we're talking about.
You think so?
Yeah, just about hunting, you know.
Okay, well, yeah, well, let's do the best we can. Okay, let's see if we can quickly introduce our speakers, and then I'll give a bit of a welcome note. First, Peter, just say hello.
Hello.
Okay, perfect. So Peter's from Shangani Ranch up in Zimbabwe, and then we've got Kudzai.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining in.
Okay, excellent. And Kudzai is sitting down in Cape Town. He works with the African Leadership University. And then Steve.
Hi, everybody. Nice to have you on board.
Okay, good. So Steve is with us, calling in from Gauteng. I think he's still got electricity, so he's doing well. So we've got three folks sitting in different places, and my name is Frank Vorhies, or Francis Vorhies. Good luck, Steve, and welcome everybody. This is the fifth in our series of dialogues on what's next for the wildlife economy in Zimbabwe. We started in May with a session on wild foods that took place right before a wonderful event that the Oppenheimer family put on called The Taste of Game, and that was in Vic Falls. If you missed the event, you can see the video of it. And then we had one in June on diversifying the wildlife economy. And then 2 weeks ago, we looked at how do we set up structures for wildlife enterprise at the community level, which is still a very challenging and important topic. How do we get the institutions right so communities can actually be empowered? And then last week we looked at what we called empowering Zimbabweans to harvest their resources. This week, we're pulling it all together and saying, well, how does the wildlife economy an export opportunity for the country? How can we look at wildlife goods and services, obviously starting with tourism, which is a main one, and look at the opportunities for the country to actually develop its economy through the sustainable, responsible, inclusive use of wild resources. So our three speakers are going to, like in the past ones, we'll kick it off with a bit of a statement on their perspective on export opportunities for the wildlife economy in Zimbabwe. And then we'll have a bit of a discussion. You're welcome to put comments in the chat. That's definitely a good way to do it. And then we'll try and wrap it up well within the hour. So to move on, so it's not just all me talking, why don't we start off with Peter. Peter from Shangani Holistic. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Frank, for that introduction, and welcome everyone to this dialogue on increasing Zimbabwe's exports of wildlife products. So let me start. I'll focus more on food, on the food side of products. So let me start by saying consumers are becoming increasingly more health conscious, with a drive towards the consumption of organic foods. The consumer is willing to pay extra for goods that are hormone, antibiotic, and microorganism free, and products that are being produced naturally. So you find that most of our wildlife species and wildlife products meet this criteria, of being naturally produced. However, it is important also that we do sustainable utilization of wildlife products. As you know, that some of them are occurring naturally in the wild. So we find that for good business practice, the consumer needs a consistent supply of the product. However, we need to strike a balance between consistent supply and sustainable utilization so that we avoid over-harvesting, while still making a profit and satisfying the target market. The wildlife industry in particular requires sensitivity to environmental sustainability practices, good wildlife management systems, and high ethical standards to be applied at every stage of production. Another thing that we need to consider is traceability. Now, traceability gives consumers throughout the supply chains reliable, transparent, and easily accessible information about the product's origins, while also giving governments, producers, and retailers the confidence that the product complies with national and international laws. In particular, producers need to form wildlife producers associations or equivalent, or capacitating the ones that are existing. Associations are very important because these associations can work with government departments and international regulatory bodies to document their activities, which will help in traceability and regulation of harvesting. The information is quite important in giving confidence to the countries in purchasing wildlife and wildlife products that come from officially sanctioned ranges and have been produced on a sustainable basis. Another opportunity that we have in terms of exporting wildlife products is value addition. You find that developing countries mainly export raw unprocessed materials with low value. Value addition increases the value of the goods, yet Zimbabwe has higher volumes of raw goods with low value, being exported. So there's great potential for adding value to some of the wildlife products that we have before we export them. Fruits, for example, and insects like mopane worms, these you can add value canning them before we export them, or processing them before we export them. And it's also important that sometimes exporting a product looks like a very huge task, but it's important that we start small. You find that producer communities, they need to embrace the concept of starting small and then upscaling their productions. Small producers can come together and form bigger cooperatives whose voices can be heard or whose products can be upscaled to international standards. Lastly, I'm just going to talk about some great opportunities that we have as a country. We came from far. Exporting wildlife products is not a new phenomenon in Zimbabwe, but we are already doing it. But there are areas, where we can improve and increase and contribute significantly to the gross domestic product of the country. Ostrich farming, for example, at its peak, the industry generated about US 9 million per month through exports. Crocodile farming, in a report by the United Nations in 2017, they found that the Zimbabwean crocodile exports from skin alone was valued at US $30 million annually and was ranked as the world's second largest exporter of reptile products after the United States of America. So there's great potential in that area. Fish farming, for example, currently Zimbabwean fish imports are higher than exports, yet we have large water reservoirs with great potential for commercial fisheries. It's an area which we can further explore. We look at fruits, we can dry and can wild fruits and export them. A report by the International Trade Center notes that consumers are changing their preference for natural health products such as wild fruits and medicines. And this means that least developed countries like Zimbabwe have a niche market and a potential to export wild fruits that are occurring in producer communities. So these are like my opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really like your emphasis on adding value. I think a lot of times we end up looking at wildlife products somewhat like a commodity. And what you're suggesting, Peter, is that we should look at the product, but look at how in country we can add value, whether it's canning, processing, or so on. And I think that's really, really important. Also, thanks for making wildlife more than just wild animals and talking about fruits and fish. I think sometimes we focus too much on the four-legged creatures, and the wildlife economy, of course, deals with fauna and flora and animals that swim as opposed to and fly as opposed to just ones that walk around. Okay, great. Thank you for kicking us off. Kudzai, can I turn it over to you?
Thanks a lot, Frank. Thanks, Peter, for that one. And thanks, everyone, for joining in. I think I'll take off from where Peter left off. And I think he actually mentioned a key issue that I feel is very important as we start or discuss this dialogue towards increasing exports in Zimbabwe. And one of the key issues is understanding the value chain, because I feel like if we can manage to understand the value chain of each and every wildlife product that we're going to export in Zimbabwe, that would definitely benefit us. For example, especially with the crocodile industry that Peter actually mentioned, if you look at the global luxury goods market, it was estimated that it was going to be 1.1 trillion in 2023. This estimate was in 2016. So, I mean, things could have changed because of COVID and a whole lot of other things, and consumer perspective has changed over the past couple of months. So this will probably change next year. But where I'm getting to is the fact that the global luxury goods market that we that I'm talking about consists of high-end products. This include your watches, your bags, your shoes, and all those things. And most of these things, of these products, they come from crocodile skins. And Zimbabwe is an exporter to much of this, to most of these crocodile skins. Like what Peter was saying, I think in 2020 it was like close to 70,000 crocodile skins that were exported from Zimbabwe alone. So you see that understanding that value chain, where we try then to see that what are we exporting as compared to the actual value that we're going, that entity is going to have at the end of the day, I think it's important, and to actually build towards increasing and improving livelihoods and supporting people, especially communal people who are involved with managing this natural resources, especially in campfire areas. So I feel like these are some of the pertinent issues that we have to also understand, and also important to that is also accounting for the natural capital that we have, because if we don't account for the natural capital that we have, we are at risk of over-harvesting, and in most cases when we over-harvest, then this natural capital that we have, or wildlife products that we have, at the end of the day, they no longer exist, they become depleted, and we have nothing. Because the moment we start exporting, we're going to create a demand, and once the demand increases, we have to make sure that we manage that demand as we go. So accounting for this and understanding the value chain of these wildlife products, I think they are very, very pertinent to unlocking and increasing the wildlife products in Zimbabwe. And one other key issue that I would like to mention is the fact that marketing, I think marketing is a very underestimated approach, but it is very, very key in unlocking and increasing Zimbabwe's exports. Why? Because I think there was a study that was done in 2011 that mentioned that the two factors that were holding back Zimbabwe, two key factors that were holding back Zimbabwe in terms of exports and productivity, were political instability and negative media publicity. Political instability, there's little that we can do for now, but in terms of negative media publicity, I think we can do more in terms of marketing the products that we have. I think increasing market visibility and trying to make sure that we export all our projects to different parts of the world through increasing our market, I think that is very, very important. Take, for example, Rwanda. If you look at Rwanda at some point was the one place that people do not want to visit. But after years and years of marketing and the Visit Rwanda initiative, you realize that people have started moving towards Rwanda in terms of visiting and so forth. So I feel like if we can manage our marketing strategies and I think this will unlock all those chances or incentives or issues that are related to increasing export value in Zimbabwe. I don't want to take much because I don't want to preempt, understanding that Steve also has some of the work, some talking points that you also want to mention. So I'm just going to leave it there, and then we can always discuss going forward.
Okay, great, fabulous. From value, adding value to value chains. And the importance of value chains, of course, is to look across that chain and say, where can we add value? And also, we're already coming into the chat. Where are some of the pressure points? Where are the sustainability challenges? Over-harvesting, as you mentioned, and the need to account for your resources, really, really important. And then bringing up at the end marketing. One of the things I think we sometimes forget is that the wildlife economy is part of an economy, which is part of a society. And it's all the aspects of any economy, the marketing, the production, the transport, the financing, et cetera, that are really key for building an economy. It's just not the product it's our own, but it's the whole packaging of the product and the financing and so on. Fabulous. Okay, Steve, over to you to share a few of your comments on this.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm just going to share a very, very quick slide show, if I may. Great stuff. And so what I'm going to be talking about are what are Zimbabwe's wildlife heroes. And I'm actually going to pick up on what the previous two speakers have just been speaking about. And I want us to look at what are hero ingredients and rethink that. And I'm picking this up from a Zimbabwean producer of wild plant products. Okay. But let's look at the biodiversity economy versus the wildlife economy. Zimbabwe, when we first started out, was one of the originators of the Campfire program, community-based natural resource management. And its original focus was on the high-value charismatic species such as elephant, lion, buffalo. And we haven't really moved much beyond that. And as mentioned earlier, the term wildlife actually includes fauna and flora. So let's actually drill down into what all this actually means, because in Zimbabwe, hunting's always taken a center stage. It's got a lot of publicity, and it's a big bucks industry. And we need to look at that versus something much more possibly mundane, like marula marmalade. What? Marula marmalade versus hunting a buffalo? Well, let's look at some of the figures and the facts. Okay. The global plant extracts market size is estimated to be valued at an American US dollars, 34 billion, and projected to rise to 61 billion. Okay. Massive increase there in growth. Now, when you look at where does this come from? It comes from the market gap, where there's a massive demand globally for wild products, and it's huge. And the customers, they want healthy, natural products, as mentioned by Peter. They're interested in exotic products as well. But if we look at some specific examples, the potential of marula alone globally is 215 million US dollars per annum. Okay, that's just one of the many plants that we have in our areas. And when you look at hunting, it's only a small portion of the total potential biodiversity value. If we look at Kalahari melon and the oil from it, the summer melon, okay, there it's in high demand from the cosmetic industry, for moisturizing. It's used in massage oils, and it's the base oil for many other kind of perfumed oil products as well. And if we look at the potential of taking something that was an absolute disaster, this particular company in the droughts in South Africa, and we've got these melons in Zimbabwe, but they took the only surviving plant during the drought, and they started to investigate it and started to extract the oils, marketed it, got it into the various value chains, got it accepted overseas. And then from just producing superior products, we're able to get certain awards, and now they're established in the overseas markets. Massive potential, okay. And another similar organization producing wholesale Kalahari melon oils, satisfying the demands in Europe. There you can see, they've got clients in so many other countries. What I'm getting at is we haven't really explored in Zimbabwe the potential of something like marula, okay, where you can actually sell it and produce and sell these sparkling salsas at the moment. What about prickly pear? And what about making beer? In the Okavango Delta, they get millet from the communities, and they create the ingredients they need, and they sell it in their breweries, their craft breweries in Maun and in Victoria Falls. Okay, and they mix up the need to create or reduce human-elephant conflict by helping the communities to work and see elephants as a solution and a benefit, and not as a problem. And through that, they also then are able to sell their products into the market and get benefits from that. So instead of having our eyes wide shut, we need our eyes wide open. And let's open our eyes to the massive potential that the wider biodiversity economy, and especially the rich phyto trade, has potentially globally. Thank you very much.
Okay, fabulous. That was an excellent presentation. And I think what you've driven home with, which I think Zimbabwe actually, Steve, is a potential lead in this, is the whole wild plant economy and ingredients and so on. On our first video call that we did it in Vic Falls on Wild Foods, we had Gus LeBreton, another Zimbabwean, who likes to call himself Africa's plant hunter, which I think is a lovely expression. So he hunts plants and he looks for the value out of the plant. And as you rightly say, he'd be in your camp to say that there's a lot of money in those plants and a heck of a lot more money than there is in a bit of trophy hunting. You know, it's a bigger value proposition, and you can make a lot more products with it, like you were just showing, which is there's a lot more added value. So I'm going to bring it back to Peter in a second here, but just to sort of put this in context, it's in the DNA of the government to promote this. It's just a question of going from knowing about it to implementing it. So back in 2014, the Zimbabwe government put out the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan for the CBD process. And as you know, we've got the Biodiversity Convention coming up. And back then they talked about commercial uses of wildlife, including, quote, hunting, fishing, forest, timber harvesting, ecotourism, and harvesting of non-timber forest products, which is what Steve's just been talking about. Now, bringing it back to you, Peter, when we had that the Oppenheimer party up in Vic Falls, where they produced a whole lot of game meat. One of the things, and it was great. I think what did we have? Eland and warthog and was it wildebeest? I can't remember. Or kudu that we had as the meats at that evening event. I was also wondering whether or not on a place like Shangani you could have harvested the seasoning as well, and not just the meat, but the various spices that could go in, which brings it back to what Steve was just talking about. So on the ranch, are you looking at plants as well as animal production? Is my question to you, Peter.
Thank you very much. Currently, we are doing animal production. We're not focusing on fruits.
Okay, so you're mostly looking at animal production. So one of the opportunities you may find is that some of these landscapes like you're at may be able to diversify, do a bit of animal, do a bit of plant, if the resources are there, a bit of fish and so on. Something to think about, yeah. So but you're now mostly a beef farm, but you're also looking at the wildlife ranching now and even for export.
Yeah.
Yeah, fabulous. Okay. And so you can imagine in a place like that, you're taking both your livestock and your wild resources, which you have to harvest both of them sustainably. You're not going to go and wipe out all the wild resources. Plus you have animals that just come in to visit that you don't harvest. You were mentioning the other day when we had met about your elephant population that comes in from Vic Falls, I guess from Wangi.
Wangi, yeah.
And they come in every year. So there's also potential tourism component even on a beef ranch where you could come there, have a steak dinner from the local meat and go see the elephants.
Yes, yeah. I think you're raising some good points where we diversify, you know, our production system. Instead of if we look at the meat, for example, and maybe we also look at the skin, add value to the skin, make some shoes. You know, our head of operations here started, you know, on making some nguni shoes, for example, as a way of you know, diversifying the products that we get from our wildlife and our cattle. And so, sure, I believe diversifying, you know, the product base will lead to, you know, to more profits and a sustainable future.
Okay, so it's both looking at the resources that you've got on the ground and you're going to utilize, and then all different parts of it. So if you will, there the meat, the hide, even the gelatin, the fat, and what you can, in a sense, like we do with livestock. We can do the same with a kudu or with a wildebeest. The Zimbabwe National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan also talks about semi-commercial and informal uses, and these may be ones that can be scaled up. And here, back to the comment about plants, they talk about in the plan, mushrooms, edible fruits, wild vegetables, medicinal plants, wild meats, birds, insects, reeds, thatch, and fish. So that's just a sampling of what's actually in official government policy. So from Kudzai, I wanted to ask you a question of following on from Peter, from the work that you're starting to do looking at the Kaza region, of which Zimbabwe is part of it. Pardon the pun, but where do you see the low-hanging fruits? Where do you see the possibility of exports for the country? Is it fruits? Is it meats? Is it both of them? More tourism? What have you?
Thank you, Frank. That's a tricky one, but I think one commodity that could be low-hanging for now is the meat, because I think that if you look at the Kaza region, in terms of ecotourism, and one of the major activity that is there, it's hunting, and what happens to the meat after the hunt. So I think that is a low-hanging fruit, and if it can be packaged into biltong and exported, I feel like it has so much potential, and it could actually provide more, and it's from a export perspective, and from also supporting local livelihoods, especially for communities that live around some of these protected areas where this hunts occur, or even in campfire areas. Because in most instances, I think with this discussion last time, we were saying that, for example, after a hunt or a giraffe hunt, most of those communities, for example, in Zimbabwe, they don't eat the giraffes, but there could be a country or probably within the Kaza region that consumes this giraffe meat. So it then becomes easy for the Zimbabwean authority or whoever's managing it, or who is possession of the meat, to package it and then export it and trade it with that country. And I feel like it then opens those lines of trading. And so for me, I feel like wild meat is one of the key commodities that is low hanging and that can be utilized for the betterment of especially local communities.
Okay, that's very interesting, because with your wild meat, if it's ranched, if it's free range, if you will, as opposed to intensive farming, it could have very good landscape impacts too, because it could help you to maintain larger landscapes that these animals are on. And your point about exporting for different tastes is also very interesting. I lived in Kenya years ago when they did have some game meat available in Nairobi, and giraffe and zebra were both very common, and actually quite good, to be honest with you. And but the Southern Africans don't eat much zebra or giraffe. It's not as popular down south, but in East Africa, at least in Nairobi, they were selling it, and it was quite popular. And so you could imagine that there could be opportunities to trade in certain products where there's different tastes, if you will, in different communities. Now, the folks I've been working with up in West Africa, they eat chimpanzees, but I'm not ready for the chimpanzee dinner yet, but there's, everybody's got their own flavor, Okay, so that's very interesting. You see meat as a potential opportunity, and linking it to hunting and so on. So to take off on that, there's a comment by Richard Ferguson about exporting the commodity versus the value added, and he talks about crocodiles and says the higher value product is exported raw because the buyer will not accept local tanning, etc. So along with marketing, as a point, I'll just leave this with Kudzai for a second, but the others can chip in. What about increasing standards of production? How do you see, so that people would then look and say, oh no, the best tanning comes out of Bulawayo, or what have you? And how does it, it's not just marketing, but if you're going to add that extra value along the value chain, and how do you actually improve the standards of that, the canning, the processing, the tanning, and so on, the making of shoes, etc.
Yeah, that's a very good one, Richard. I was looking at Padenga Holdings, company in Zimbabwe that specializes in the export of these crocodile skins. And you realize that, like what Richard was saying, these crocodile skins have different grades. And you notice that a certain grade is more suitable for export, and then there's grades that are not suitable for exports. But I feel like if we are to really unlock the potential for these crocodiles skins, we as much as we might want to set up a center, I feel like there are already companies, like I said, Padenga, that is already just doing so much, but it just needs, we just need to probably, it's a top-down approach or bottom-up approach, where we need to make sure that we incentivize Padenga in such a way that it capacitates other local or other local associations, companies, or organizations that are also doing the same thing. Because if you like, why I'm talking about Padenga also has other crocodile ranches that are outside of Zimbabwe, but they're not really crocodile. They are more of alligator ranches, I think in Florida, up in Florida or something like that. So you realize that they have that market and they've been in the industry for some time. So I feel like if we can have those players capacitate the local communities or local organizations, I think and local cooperatives, I think it could be so much helpful for those communities and cooperatives.
Oh, okay, fascinating. So actually building that enterprise at the community level. Yeah, absolutely fascinating. So Steve, let me bounce it back to you. I'm going to build off of a question that Joe asked, which is a great question. What's the difference between an economy, biodiversity economy, and a wildlife economy? But let me bring it back to two ends of a challenge that I see. So Joel, just quickly, I think it's part of its semantics is this use of different language. Some people say biodiversity economy, some say conservation economy, some say nature-based solutions, some say wildlife economy. We like the word wildlife economy because of the word wild. It brings it back to landscapes, natural habitats, and so on. But biodiversity includes any living thing, so that includes, chicken farms. It's not just wild resources. In fact, in the Convention on Biological Diversity, the word wild only shows up 3 times. It hardly ever focuses on the wildness of the resource. And so wildlife economy has that sort of wilderness landscape image. And that's where I'm going to lead my question to Steve on. On the one hand, you've got the sustainability challenge of overharvesting. And especially if you build export markets, you could overharvest too much. But on the other hand, then you have the drive, if you will, of industrialized agriculture to cultivate the product and turn it into a crop, or turn it into livestock. So turning a kudu into a cow, livestock, or turning a marula plant into an apple orchard, and you start ending up with that. And we see that in South Africa with the rooibos, where there is still some wild harvesting of rooibos, but most of it, they've taken a wild plant and made it into a cultivated plant. It's now, and then you've lost the wild bit. So on the one hand, you were worried about taking too much out of the wild, but on the other hand, that may drive us to actually ranch, farm, the resource, and then we also lose the habitat. So how do we, can this be addressed, or is it going to be a touch point for us going forward?
Yeah, I think if you really look back, all our domestic animals at one stage were wild. Okay, and so it's a process that takes place if there's a demand for it. But I've been involved in the kind of plant-based trade, fighter trade for nearly 30-40 years, since we started Campfire with Gus LeBreton, funny enough, and he did all the plant stuff with his organization he started called Sapphire. But your question about overharvesting, well, if you look at Namibia, they have a very, very, very vibrant devil's claw industry. Okay, and they've developed such beautiful, sophisticated methodologies that are community sensitive, but very, very orientated to preventing overharvesting. Okay, and so there are those mechanisms that can be put in place, to stop that overharvesting. And I think there's so many different plants that we've never even touched on. When I was working within the Department of National Parks and Wildlife in Botswana, we explored very heavily the kind of really fringe stuff, that there are many weeds, wild weeds, that can be used in dried floral bouquets and exported. Who would have thought of that? Well, we did. But there's a whole market for that, potentially, if you can export all of the beautiful farmed flowers from Zimbabwe, from Harare into Holland. Well, a bunch of wild decorative dried floral things can go with them. But the point that I think we're missing also in all of this is, you know, where do most of these kind of plants exist? Well, they live, or they exist that can be harvested in the communal areas.
Mm-hmm.
And so why haven't they actually been really harvested properly yet and marketed? And that comes back to three things, I think, four things, is that we've never really taken the time to develop the capacity of communities to know what to harvest, like the Namibians did with Devil's Claw. They went through a whole process to get them to do that properly. So we need to get them to be able to have the skills to do that and to know what is sustainable and not. We need to also then help those people have, or help generally, okay, people have entrepreneurial skills to be able to see the potential markets there. And I showed some examples of individuals that saw the gap and developed the whole chain. And yes, it took many years, but you know, we need those entrepreneurs and that mindset to do that. And another thing that we're not doing properly, okay, or not doing really at all, is we're not having our innovation hat on, okay. I'm just going to put my innovation hat on now for you, okay. You know, interesting things like we experimented to a degree in when I was working with communities in the Okavango Delta, that they lived up against the veterinary fence, and across the way were these high-end tourism luxury lodges. And we actually discussed, it never got off the ground because I finished that project before it was matured. But what we discussed was the communities getting impact investment to buy, say, 10 sable bulls, okay, and place them across the fence in the tourism sector. And they get paid a dividend by that concession holder for having nice trophy level bulls that people can come from a tourism point of view and come and see. So it's like investing in stock, okay? That's a pun for you again, okay? But, you know, we're not thinking out of the box like that enough yet, okay? And I think that's the challenge that we need to take away from this dialogue.
No, I think that's absolutely excellent, Steve. That's and I love the way we're not just talking about just ramping up tourism and trophy hunting. I mean, that's a small piece of the bigger opportunity here.
Sure.
And we've just got to think more broadly about it, and even moving towards exporting meat. But one of the comments that came in, I think it's from Holly, was about local demand and regional demand. 2 points is, I think servicing the local market makes a heck of a lot of sense, but for a lot of businesses, being able to have both a local and an international customer opens up a bigger value proposition, allows you to scale up. So it's not an either or, it's servicing the local and the international market. But the most exciting thing to me is not international market. You mentioned Howland at one point with flowers, of course, the big flower, not about exporting to Europe or North America, but exporting within the region and trade within the region. So selling Zimbabwean game meat to Lusaka, selling Zimbabwean game meat to Johannesburg or to Lagos, or as I said earlier, selling the zebra and the giraffe up to Nairobi, where it's a more popular dish, if you will, if that's the case. So one of the opportunities may be to open up that market more in the region. We're looking at the moment on a project on non-tariff barriers to trade in wild meat in Southern Africa, with some discussions in Namibia, Zambia, and South Africa taking place. The interesting little bit we heard about Zambia, that may be true in Zim, and we just haven't thought out of the box, and I'm going to ask Peter about this, is to what extent is there a sort of already an international trade in game meat? I mean, Kudzai said this is a low-hanging fruit. Peter's got resources. What I hear in Zambia is that people are actually importing game meat from South Africa and then re-exporting up to DRC. And there it's a smoked joint. It's not a biltong and it's not a fresh venison. I guess it's like a leg of kudu, and then it's smoked and then it gets exported. So the country's already in an international trade. It's just not as well known as, and maybe needs to be a bit more formalized, and maybe there's a need for more quality control, who knows, but it does exist. Peter, what do you think of the potential of you guys building up a wildlife meat industry that could also service neighboring countries and not just in addition to Zim?
Thank you very much for that. Yes, there's great potential, in Zimbabwe. Like Kudzai said, that when trophy hunters take their trophy, there's leftovers of meat which we can add value and maybe make biltong or even can some meat and then sell to the regional markets. So I think we can start home and expand into the region before even think of going to Europe or going to Asia or going to America, because there's already demand for wildlife meat, for example, within the region, because I believe that people here already want game meat. Sometimes just lack of accessibility to the meat.
Okay, no, that's very interesting. There is a potential market, and it is more complicated. I was over the weekend with a young Kenyan who just finished a degree at the University of Cambridge, and he had his first wild meat in England, not in Kenya. He had it at a dinner party hosted by Nigerians, and they had brought the meat up from South Africa, and they had kudu. And so there you go, Nigerians buying South African meat and hosting a dinner party in the UK. This is the potential global market that we can be in. Question about tax incentives, Kule. Can any Kudzai, Steve, Peter? I don't know if any of you guys are tax experts, but Kule asks a very interesting question about whether there's tax incentives for wildlife products, in which the government may encourage this industry to develop by giving tax breaks, either for domestic sales or for international sales. Kudzai, have you seen anything of this with your research for the region, or Steve?
Yeah, when I was with the Department of Wildlife in Botswana and looking at a broad range of a suite of natural plant products, we took it to the permanent secretary in the presidency, and they were blown away with the potential in what we showed, and they just immediately said, we'll put 30 million on the floor, just to get this going, and then talk to us about what's going to make it happen. Okay, and so there was an indication there that if they needed to step up, they were willing to do that. So whether it's a tax incentive or an incentive to get an industry going or an enterprise going, microfinancing, we've seen that, but I think it's absolutely essential to kickstart. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's very interesting. And again, that's the thinking out of the box. And in some ways, in our sector, speaking of us as the wildlife conservation sector, we've often worked with our ministries of environment and ministries of wildlife. But when we talk about the wildlife economy, we have to reach out to the agricultural ministries, dare I say, and to the trade ministries to talk about what type of structures can we put in place and how can we get wildlife products into the value chains, and how can government provide support? And it could be a tax break, as Kule says. It could just be unlocking trade barriers. It could be helping to develop standards for harvesting meat, getting the veterinary rules right, and so on and so forth. So I would say, Kule, that's another one of putting on one of Stephen's hats to look at where government can provide not just tax incentives, but incentive structures to help these economies grow and to do what Kudzai was talking about, to give much more value added at the community level. So the community just doesn't harvest, but they also can produce, package, market, and so on. Yes, Steve.
Frank, yeah, just to add to that, one of the major constraints I remember now that we didn't really push it through is the import restrictions in Europe are absolutely onerous. You have to go through all sorts of phytosanitary, pharmacological certification kind of things for marula oil, and we were looking at mongeti nuts, the oil from that which is used in cooking, and mongongo nuts rather, and because it was going to be used in cooking, wow, the licensing just to get it accepted into Europe was huge. But that's where a government could play a role. They could fund that whole process to get that product accepted. Then everybody follows behind, like pushing into the market. So, another area that the government could assist us in. But just a quick one for you. I saw a lot of people online, their heads picked up. You were talking about some of the meat that was going to be exchanged, and you said it was a smoking joint. I think that interested quite a lot of people.
Yeah, well, my understanding is that, I need to learn more about this, but what I was told is folks up in Zambia will smoke the joint, and then they're, what do you call it? They're bring it back to the kitchen and put it in with onions and tomatoes and make a stew out of it. Sounds great. Sounds absolutely fabulous. So just to wrap up, because we're going to wrap up in a minute or so here, how to increase the demand for wildlife products, specifically fauna, given the loud voices of animal organizations. Well, that was what the Taste of Game event was about up in Vic Falls, and it was the second one that the Oppenheimer generations put on. They put one on in Johannesburg, and I think the third one will be in Lusaka. And the idea is to show that this product is organic, it's chemical free, it's healthy, it's low cholesterol, and so on, to actually build a bigger taste. And then with what Steve was talking about, the difficulty of getting into Europe, actually promote the product in Africa and promote wildlife products for Africans, African wildlife for African people. So don't worry about getting into this protectionist European Union. You know, sell your product to Dar es Salaam, sell it to Maputo, sell it to Yaoundé, and so on. So everybody, we're going to stop this one a little bit early because we're off to discuss non-tariff barriers with Namibians next, but it was a fabulous opening discussion. Thank you all for those who have been to more than one of these. And what we will do in the new year is to reflect on what we've discussed and see how we can help move the wildlife economy forward in Zimbabwe. So watch the space for 2023. I'll let everybody go. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Kudzai. And thank you, Peter. Thank you very much.